My name is Hannah Starr-Rogers, and I'm a fellow here at the KHK. I'm also a Science and Technology Studies scholar, and I look very carefully at the arts. That sounds like a mouthful, but Science and Technology Studies is the anthropology, sociology, history, and philosophy of science and technology. And so we use a mixed methods approach to think about the role of science in society and our individual lives and the power that science has. I add to that mixture the arts, and by this I'm thinking of contemporary arts, but also the history of artists being involved with science over a long period. And so I call myself an art, science, and technology studies scholar. In addition to my scholarly work, I also work as a curator. So I'm interested in pieces of contemporary art that have an element of science, that either use science or critique science, and also participate in the networks of art. So my research here at KHK is a project called STS by Material Means. In STS, we primarily think about text, even though we know that text isn't the only thing scientists are up to. So we attentively create text to react to the material practices of science. I'm interested in thinking about the way that particularly contemporary artists and curators have worked with materials to address some of the same issues. So in STS, for example, we're really interested in who has a voice in science and who gets to participate, but also in things like plastic waste that happens from laboratories, things like issues of surveillance and gender in science and engineering. And those are all topics that people who are in contemporary arts have made projects about. Only instead of writing text about it, they've instead made artworks or installations, visual material, sonic material that lets us experience those kinds of questions. And so I'm interested in thinking about how we might move the tent poles of STS out a little bit further, not only think about text, but also thinking about people who are making the same kinds of critiques and observations that we make, only by a material means, often a contemporary art means. This is a great question because that's a central question that I'm looking at. What are the ways in which STS tools might be useful at looking at these liminal objects? Because you might say, hey, when you look at art, shouldn't you use a history of art to do that? There are, after all, a lot of great tools in history of art. And I think it's absolutely the case that we ought to be interested in that. But because of the liminal status of some of these new artworks, where there are science histories, science anthropology, science philosophies being invoked in them, I think it's really important to think about the way that STS tools might be able to approach those questions. And so I'm interested in these artworks that are at once engaging in art questions, but also engaging in science questions. And I think that means we need kind of a bigger toolbox, tools that are coming from STS as well as from art and design methods. Artistic research is an area that's grown a lot in the time that I've been working in this kind of subject. And I think that probably making the toolbox bigger is the best way for us to more fully understand art science works. So I do plenty of kind of old-fashioned STS research where I'm looking closely at the practices in laboratories. But those laboratories are often populated by people who are in the arts, and they act slightly differently in the laboratory. They're interested in slightly different questions. They take the protocols in a really different way, the kind of recipes for doing their work. I'm often thinking about biology or environmental science, but there are lots and lots of other artists working in different kinds of laboratories. But it does mean that somebody who works in STS doing biological laboratory work would probably really recognize the kinds of things that I'm trying to observe. So it looks like traditional ethnography, but it also looks like long-term interviews and showing up to installations and trying to find out about the different kinds of publication cultures and crediting cultures that are going on inside of art science. Another aspect to my research culture is dealing with curation practice. So I've been the curator of 6 major exhibitions that dealt in some way with art and science coming together. And this means sometimes practitioners who have made a piece that's liminal, that acts both as an art piece and as a science piece. And sometimes it's people who are thinking about the history of science and the way art is related to it. And sometimes it's literally just stuff about the same subject made by artists and made by scientists, and bringing those things together in a room to think about what their relationship might be. And it seems to me that the kind of research that I need to do to make this kind of curation project, to make a materials argument, often looks an awful lot like the kinds of research that I need to do to make an academic paper. And so I'm interested in thinking about the way that we credit those two things and what other kinds of arguments might be made inside of STS using curatorial practice.